Times of change are opportunities. These are moments given to us where we can remember what matters most, we can recommit to the things that we know we ought to do, and we can chart new paths for our future. Moses knew the importance of this kind of moment. After leading the people out of Egyptian slavery through God's mighty acts of salvation and deliverance, and then guiding them through wilderness lands, times full of both glory and failure, they finally arrived at the point God had intended them to be 40 years prior. They were now at the doorstep of Canaan, the land God had promised to their forebears, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, long, long ago. It had been quite a journey to get to this point, and Moses knew that his time was coming to an end and that he was not going to cross the Jordan with them. Now, what we've heard, as Judy's read for us, are some of his parting words of wisdom, knowing that even though Moses would not continue with them, that their story still had many chapters to be written. What Moses had to say to the people at that moment of transition was a matter of great importance. Now, I probably need to slow down here a moment and clarify something. I, believe it or not, am not so arrogant as to see myself as the Moses-like character in this story. Nor am I claiming the mantle of the successor Joshua who is to come. And you are not the Hebrew children, and I'm not claiming that however many years we may have together will be a land flowing with milk and honey. Yeah, sorry. And yet, we really should pay attention to what Moses had to say in this moment of change. For there is something here for us that can guide us in the midst of our own season of change. First, Moses knew that there is no future without remembering the places from which the people had come. Throughout Deuteronomy, he called the people to remember the past ways that God had delivered them and the ways that God had led them. In our passage specifically, remembrance comes as the reminder of God's enduring promise to their forebears, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A promise that their generation, as they were about to enter Canaan, would finally come to pass. Their generation would live in the land that God had promised their ancestors. It was in the act of looking back and remembering that they could recall from where they had come. They could recall who they are, and they could recall why any of it matters at all. Telling their ancient stories was also the best way they had to do what we just sang here, sing of God's great faithfulness. Now, it's no small thing that our congregation, our church, has a history team. I'm grateful for Amy. There's Amy. Her leadership and the solid team that she works with to help us remember the importance of our past. I'm grateful for all, whether they're part of that team or not, who help us preserve the rich history of this place and the people who have gone before us. For there is no faithful future without remembering to first look back. And yet, the way that we tell our story matters deeply. There is a great danger in telling our history incorrectly. It sounds something like this. Oh, I remember the good old days. I wish we just did it like we did back then. Or the one that stifles more churches than probably anything else, ours included. But that is the way that we've always done it. Now, don't hear me wrong. There are times that we should keep doing things year after year because it's the right thing to do. But then there are all the other times when we keep doing stuff because we're stuck in a rut, or we've lost the imagination to envision something new, or we're simply afraid of what we will be if we are something different than what we are. We need our past. We need to remember our past, but it's important that we remember it rightly. Moses was not calling the people to be so fixated on what had been behind them that they were unable to notice the things that were in front of them. No, the past, remembering the past, is the very thing that opens us up to the possibility of a future. So I'd like for us to decide today that we will abolish one phrase from our vocabulary from henceforth and forevermore. May I never hear in this place again, but we've always done it that way. Can we agree to that? Oh, you clap now, but I'm going to hold you to it later. Instead of that comment, let us find ourselves asking one another some better questions, like, what does our rich history make possible? What does it call us to do and to be here and now in this place? Amen? Moses knew if we can remember the past and tell our story in that way, that we can write new stories and that new possibilities will emerge in front of us. New possibilities emerging. Moses, in this closing exhortation, knew that there were paths before the people, two paths for Israel's future. If the people would remember God's covenant, and they would walk faithfully in the paths of God, then all sorts of good things were going to come their way. Long life, blessings, generations to come. In short, they were going to have a good future that would continue to unfold and unfold and unfold. Of course, if they were to abandon the things they knew they ought to do, it would all fall apart. But I'm a Methodist, and so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that part. And yet Moses is not simply stating two possibilities for the people, for them to choose A or B. No, he is pleading with them. This is a heartfelt plea from Moses for the people to envision the good possibility of a rich future, to remain faithful to their God, to make the right choices, and to live the way they ought in the places God was calling them to be. For this is the path to flourishing and goodness. So far, Moses has shown us that moments of change can call us to remember the past rightly and to envision the possibility of a good future. But Moses also called the people to look at themselves in the moment as well, to pay attention to who they were at that moment. It was 5 times, as Judy read to us today, that Moses said, today, 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 today. It seems Moses knew that the work of remembering and the work of dreaming are the calls to make decisions in the present moment. That means committing to love the Lord your God, to walk in God's ways, to follow God's wisdom. In the NRSV, as we've heard today, the choice is life and prosperity or death and adversity. Life and prosperity, those are 2 terms that have lost some meaning in our time, aren't they? We've seen that language of life deflated and used in political ways. We've seen greedy preachers say, just put another check in the mail and you'll prosper. For Moses, as we see throughout the pages of the Torah, though, life and prosperity include so much more It includes a society of justice and mercy. It includes living faithfully before God and in harmony with one another and with all of creation. We might renew that language among us today and say the choice before us is flourishing and abundance or degradation and destruction. In a moment like the one where we find ourselves, let us choose wisely. I love that little bit in our passage. It was at the very beginning of what Judy read. Moses assures the people that none of these choices are out of their reach. God's desires for the people are not locked away in some far-off place in the sky, nor are they across a vast sea requiring a treacherous journey. No, the choice is right here. He says to the people, the choice is in your mouth. It's in your heart. While God may be fundamentally mysterious, the ways that God is calling us to live are among us already. They are the seeds that have been planted in good soil. We'll talk more about that next Sunday. The things that have been formed in us through spiritual formation, through gathering in worship, participating in small groups, in friendships that you've made, but also through intuition, understanding the work of God's Spirit in the soul. We don't need some secret code to decipher the things that God intends for us to do in our time. We need to listen to the heart. We need to listen to one another. I suspect it's because we set out to do that very thing last summer that our listening campaign was as powerful and as effective as it was. If we'll slow down and listen in to the stuff of the heart, we won't have any trouble finding clarity or the next step that we ought to make. We heard last summer and in the days following, we heard the language of our hearts. We heard dreams that are becoming new realities, new missional priorities among us. We said, with a great deal of clarity, we want to grow as a congregation through vibrant ministries with children, youth, and their families. Not only is Becca doing good work to help make that happen, we also have a new associate pastor who's already doing incredible work in that realm. Many of you have helped make that possible too. We've said that as a congregation, we don't just want to talk, but we want to resist injustice by doing the work of justice. We said we want to open ourselves up to be a place of ever-increasing welcome and belonging. We said we want to work to develop deeper and new relationships. If you're tracking that, G-R-O-W. We want to grow. That's what we said. And it doesn't seem like a far stretch to say that this is the stuff of life. The things you want are the stuff of life, the stuff of flourishing and abundance, and the kind of things that God desires for us today and in the days that are still to come. Now, I assure you, that listening work we did last summer was not a one-off thing. We're going to keep listening that way, doing the kind of work that allows us to hear one another's hearts, but also to listen into folks who live in Wellington Heights and beyond. Because today, God is still calling us to choose abundance and flourishing. And to live it out, we need to keep listening to one another and to keep choosing abundant and flourishing life over against powers of death and destruction that are at work in this world. That is the result of countless intentional actions that we make today, and with each new day that follows. In a moment of change, like the one in which we find ourselves. Let's remember rightly. Let's look forward with imagination in our hearts. Let us choose today to love God, to walk in God's paths, and to continually choose God's ways. Let it be so, and I can only imagine how good our future is going to be.